Welcome to the Speculative Sandbox, your audio playground for creative storytellers. My name is Garrett K. Jones, and I'm doing a very special author takeover as your usual hostess with the mostest, Vicky, is on a much needed and much deserved vacation. Today we're talking about that always obnoxious topic of writer's block. I don't know about you or what you've experienced, but I know I have, and others like me have faced it as well. It absolutely sucks when you're hitting that creative wall. Today, we are going to be defining what exactly writer's block is, how to identify it, tips for beating it, and tips for motivating yourself to get back on the proverbial horse. Now, a little bit about me before we jump into today's topic. I'm an independently published author. I have 5 books in an ongoing fantasy series called The Archives of Ysink Rain, and I just had a new title, Midnight Playground, which is an anthology of original short stories, release on February 17th. I also host several podcasts, and I'll share more about how you can connect with me at the end of this episode. So let's define writer's block. Essentially, it is the condition of being unable to think of what to write, or how to proceed with writing, which is caused by psychological, external, and other factors. One such psychological factor is perfectionism, which is the fear of making mistakes or creating subpar work. Another factor is procrastination, which a lot of other writers still consider part of the writing process, but honestly, what you're doing is just putting off writing because of anxiety or no motivation. Of course, this is also derived from a huge case of self-doubt and questioning your own abilities, even if you have had success as a writer. Of course, this is just exacerbated by general stress and anxiety and otherwise feeling overwhelmed. The external factors can feel almost limitless, but some of the key areas include a lack of ideas, constant distractions and time constraints, leaving you as the writer with a lack of work-life balance. Been there, done that. And maybe you aren't feeling those issues. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's burnout, feeling exhausted or depleted from writing for extended periods. Maybe that burnout stems from how things are going in other areas of your life. I know from experience that feeling burnout in my job filtered into my creative endeavors. Personal life issues filtered in too. But maybe you feel like your writing is just weak and you don't know why. Probably it's because you don't have enough information about an essential topic in your story because of a lack of research, which research in itself can become a rabbit hole. All of these play a role in disrupting your creative energies. So that leads us to the next question that we need to ask. How do I identify if I'm experiencing writer's block? Well, there are only 3 things to really look for. First, you have little to no meaningful engagement with your writing whatsoever. This could be something as simple as opening up your computer or notebook and looking at that blank page or screen, maybe jotting down a few words. But as Phoebe Buffay once said in Friends, a plan? I don't even have a pl. It doesn't matter how long you stare at that page or screen. Nothing changes, and ultimately you feel zero motivation to write anything down, let alone be creative in the first place. This isn't even a case of the spirit being willing but the flesh remains weak. Neither your spirit nor your body want to engage in anything creative because it just feels like it's all too much of a burden. Back in March of 2023, I had the opportunity to interview one of my favorite authors for my show The Right Way on YouTube. Jonathan Mayberry provided some great answers to the questions I ask of all my guests. I ask how they got started, what inspires them, what are some of the challenges that they have faced, and one of my last questions is what advice they have to offer for other writers listening to or watching the interview. When I asked him this question, he touched on the topic of writer's block, and he said, and I quote, "I park my butt in a chair and write. I learned that writer's block is a myth created by people who don't have or understand a writing process." That kind of steps on my toes a little bit. because I've been there. But I don't necessarily agree with what he says in total, because I understand and do have a writing process, but I also know and understand how elements in my life factor in to disrupt my natural creative flow. That being said, it's important to look at what we can do to combat and beat writer's block when we've identified it conflicting with the writing we wish to do. First off, you should change your space. Sometimes changing the physical location can help you focus. This could be packing up your writing gear and finding a new location in which to write. Maybe you're used to writing at home, and so you go to the coffee shop. Or maybe you're used to the coffee shop and you decide, you know what, the silence of a library would be better suited for me. Or maybe changing your space involves cleaning up the space that you normally use because a cluttered workspace can be a distraction. Maybe rearranging the layout can jumpstart that creativity as well. Second, read your last good page, because this helps immerse you into your story's world, which is less abrupt than just sitting down to write. This is especially helpful if you lost your flow and are returning to the process after an extended period of time. When this happens for me, I personally go back to the content I've outlined to see what I should expect in a particular passage, and then I read through what I've already written in that passage to see where I need to jump back in. Third, you might try free writing. This could be as simple as going off a random prompt or just letting your stream of consciousness get the better of you and guide your pen. This may take the pressure off and help you unwind your lax as you get back into the habit of writing after a dry spell. Lastly, if you're struggling with writer's block, take a break. Creative burnout is real, and it can wreck you if you're at that point and forcing yourself to be creative when you really aren't feeling it. That's how I was for reading for a while. During the early to mid 2010s, I was working on a master's degree, and I was having to read close to 400 pages from various textbooks every single week for 16 weeks at a time during each semester. This killed reading physical books for me for years. I took a break from picking up tangible books and switched over to audiobooks because I was able to listen when I was going to bed, or when I was playing video games, or when I was driving to work, or when I was working out, or when I was cooking, or insert any tangential activity here. It was a way for me to continue breathing in literature without overwhelming myself and burning myself out on it. Sometimes, when you're feeling creative burnout, all it takes for inspiration to return is to take a step back. One of the things that I also do is I will sometimes use moving meditation as a way to reset my creativity. This could have been doing a workout or going for a walk while listening to music. Other times it was cleaning my house or doing yard work. Physical movement can actually help stimulate creativity during a break. But these tips are great when you feel motivated to write but can't get into the groove. So what should we do when we lack that motivation and we want to get it back? Well, I've got more than 2 times the number of tips to cover that, because ultimately, writer's block is really a lack of motivation more than anything else. So first up, make a mood board filled with imagery, quotes, character aesthetics, or music that reflects your story and triggers your creativity. This isn't something that I normally do, but it can be very helpful for other characters. And I guess maybe I do set up a mood board, but I don't do it in the traditional sense of like I put together like the poster board and all these other things. I will actually go on to Hero Forge and I'll start designing a character. And then from there, I will pull out one of those RPG character templates, and I just start filling out the background information and the dossier for this character. Then I start thinking about what kind of a character arc I want this character to go on and stuff like that. Or maybe it's an environment I'm looking to design, and I start drawing it. Or I take photographs, or I research locations that are similar to that. So I do it in kind of a more disjointed way, but I still, I guess, put together a mood board without even realizing I'm doing it. And that will bring me to another point in a little bit. But motivational tip number 2, turn it into a game. Gamifying your writing goals and rewarding yourself for certain levels of milestones or point values can help motivate you into getting projects done. Maybe the reward is watching an hour of your favorite show on Netflix. Maybe it's rewarding yourself with a small bowl of ice cream, or that entire box of Girl Scout cookies you've been dying for. Whatever the reward is, turn it into a game where you can reward yourself for getting things written. Tip number 3, and this goes back to basics and recommends you create music playlists for your story. This piggybacks off of tip number 1, where it was talking about incorporating music into your mood board. But this is more specific, where you're putting together an actual playlist specifically for the story. You put together lists that match a scene or a character's aesthetic, and you listen to it when writing in order to give yourself the emotional or tonal inspiration that you need. Of course, it's always important to remember that music, just like that gamified reward of watching Netflix, can become a distraction. So be attentive to what works best for your environment. But if gamifying isn't helpful and music might be more distracting than helpful, tip number 4 suggests you invent fake deadlines for yourself with real consequence. Maybe you tell your friend that you will buy them a coffee every time you miss a deadline. It is incentivizing. Maybe you maybe not only tell your friend that, maybe you step it up. After so many deadlines missed, you take them out to dinner at their favorite restaurant. Whatever it is. You can even set timers for short-term deadlines to try and complete a writing project before time runs out. What this does is it incentivizes you to get the job done and saves you from having to spend money on a friend or penalize yourself because you miss a deadline. Tip number 5, put yourself in the POV of one of your characters and write a letter from their perspective to someone else. It might help stimulate some unexpected creative directions. When I did theater in high school and college, this was an activity our directors asked us to do to really get into the headspace of the character that we were playing. I did something similar in high school when I played Jonathan Harker in the stage version of Dracula. We were tasked with writing an entire background and history for our characters based on the scenes we were in to help inform how we'd behave or act on stage. Now, we did this weird thing where instead of keeping the story set in England, we changed the setting to New York. So I had to adapt my version of Jonathan Harker, and I made him a Harvard-educated attorney instead of an Oxford-educated attorney, since Harvard is like the preeminent law school, with Yale being a kind of a second for the United States. That's the direction I went with. And because at some point in the play, I was supposed to come out on stage wielding a sword pointed at Dracula, or the actor playing Dracula, I wrote in that part of my background had been learning how to fence while at Harvard. So I made up this content to help inform the character. Do something similar, because that might create a direction for you that allows you to kind of inform the character arc that you're trying to develop, or it might inform how a certain sequence of plot events take place. Tip number 6, and this piggybacks off of a couple of previous suggestions. Maybe you turn writing into the reward and make it the real treat that you're looking forward to doing instead of the task you're dreading. It's all about mindset. Promise yourself a writing session as a reward for doing the dishes, or successfully putting the kids to bed on time, or finally rousting that clouder of cats living under the overgrown azalea bushes in your backyard who keep spraying your front door. Little whiskered schmucks. The point is to Matha. Make writing fun again. Or maybe take a page out of your already out of sequence day-to-day and use tip number 7 to write your scenes out of order. In fact, this is something that happens in filmmaking, where sequences of a story or plot are filmed out of order based on the availability of the actors. While you don't have to worry about your characters being unavailable from time to time, what you might do is write the sequences or the chapters out of order. Because if you're stuck on one particular scene and you can't break through it, bounce over to another scene and begin writing that. Especially if it comes later on, because the work might generate the answers you need for the section where you feel the most stuck. The penultimate tip, tip number 8, create a buddy system. Instead of having one of your non-writing friends hold you accountable because you missed a deadline and then had to buy them their extra venti triple espresso shot caramel coconut Ariana Grande coffee for the 3rd time this month or week, maybe collaborate with a friend who is a writer where you guys can hold each other accountable. You could schedule regular check-ins or have joint writing sprints or sessions. Finally, tip number 9. Play what-if games with your characters. If your story feels stale, ask yourself what-if questions to spark new ideas and reignite your curiosity about your story to make it feel like an adventure once again. But there is another caveat. Don't get stuck heading down a rabbit hole of hypotheticals, because then you might not get any writing done at all. Your brain does this really weird thing. Your brain is really cool about conservation of energy and about consolidating the steps that it's going to take to get something done. Your brain always is looking for the path of least resistance to a problem. It's looking for the easy solution, the easy answer. And so your brain will actually try to avoid a task that it feels is too challenging by distracting itself. This is why we get so distracted with music when we're trying to listen to our playlists. It's why we get too distracted by Netflix or some other platform, whether we're doom scrolling through social media or whatever it is, because our brain finds it easier to avoid and procrastinate than to actually get the job done. Okay? But if you change your mindset, feel and remind yourself that writing is actually the treat, that it's actually the reward, this will actually change things up. For me, I enjoy giving writing prompts when I lead my monthly writing workshops, which is something I do as well. And you can find those on my YouTube channel. So I'll wrap up by leaving you guys with this one. Here's the writing prompt. A stranger walks into a general store and buys a hammer, a hatchet, a coil of rope, and an apple. Start writing a 250-word story based on that and have fun. Now, I don't know what Vicky has lined up for next week on the Speculative Sandbox, but I'm sure it's going to be just as amazing as today's discussion. But if you'd like to connect with me, you guys can find me on Instagram and X at GKJ_publishing, where I post about my books. I also post about my show on YouTube called The Right Way, where we discuss book recs, author interviews, and creative writing tips. If you want to check out the other shows I'm on, you can find me either co-hosting War of the Stars, a Star Wars podcast, or Snackame over on Feast of Fandoms. Snackame is actually a show where my co-host Janae and I eat snacks while we talk about anime. She's more of an anime person than I am, so it's kind of getting me into that groove. And I've actually really enjoyed it because she's really knowledgeable about the subject. I also host an independent podcast called Storytellers, which is in its 6th season and can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All of those links are going to be found down in the description for this episode. And so if you want to connect with me, those are some great ways of doing it. Make sure to tune in next week for another episode of Speculative Sandbox. And until then, keep on writing. I've been Garrett.